Nice pick for all ages, and invite those children who are at home, perhaps. I know, sorry, many of the children can't be here today, but the children who are home, if you could come forward to the screen and give us a wave, and I'll give you a wave. Why don't you turn around, wave to the camera? And today's Time for All Ages, I think there's no better story of persistence than The Little Engine That Could. This is one of my favorite books from when I was growing up. And it was actually published in 1930, which is quite amazing when you think about it. I presume most of us are familiar with it. And this is actually the original copy, not original copy, but original version of the picture from 1930 by Watty Piper. And I just love this. So I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to, because we don't have the children here, but I'm going to tell the story. And most of us know the story. But for the children, if you want this book, I'm going to have it in the RE library here. And if any of your parents want to come and pick it up, you're welcome to pick it up because it is a fun book. As I say, it was one of my favorites. The story is really about this group of toys. And these toys have got to take this train over a hill to go to this town, and the toys are going to get delivered to all these children, and the children don't have many toys, so they're really excited about getting these toys. And so the toys all get loaded onto the train, and the train's trying to go up this hill, and it breaks down. We all know what it's like to be something when it's break down. It's really frustrating and annoying. We've had cars break down, we've had trains break down. I've had my bicycle break down lately, and that's no fun. And so this broke down, so we decided, what can we do? And so all the toys were kind of dejected. We're never going to get over to where the children are. But one of the toys was a clown. And this clown was just one of these really enthusiastic, I always saw the bright side. He said, that's no problem. We'll find a way of getting over the hill. And he saw this big, beautiful engine coming over, much better than the one that broke down. He said, he waved it down and said, hey, big engine, can you take all these toys? We need to get them over to the children on the other side of the hill. And the big engine looked like, I'm an engine that pulls restaurant cars and high-class passenger. I'm not going to pull a bunch of toys. I'm better than that. And went off in a huff. And all the toys were dejected. But the clown was like, that's okay. That's not the only train around. We'll find another one. And he saw this other really big, powerful train coming along, this engine coming along. And the clown waves it down and says, please, will you run us? We need to get all these toys over to the other side of the hill. And the big engine goes, no, I pull cargo, important things like machinery and food, not a bunch of toys. And he went off and all the toys got sad again. But the clown was still optimistic. He says, no, I'll get it. And then he saw this little engine. It was really old and tired, and it was coming along. And he waved it down and said, we really need to take the toys over to the other side of the hill. Will you help us? And the little engine said, well, I'm kind of old and I'm kind of tired, and I've never been over the other side of the hills. I just move things around the freight yard. But I'll give it a go. I'll try. I'll do my best. So all the toys cheered and loaded on, and with all the toys cheering and knowing he was doing something good, this little engine got quite excited. So he's trying to go up this hill. He's like, I know I can. He's going up the hill. And then he eventually gets it, and then he comes down the other side, and all the toys are cheering, and the engine's feeling really good. He said, I thought I could, as he went down the other side, and all the toys got off. And I think that's just a great story of persistence. But the obvious persistence is the little engine that tried getting up the hill. But my partner, Natalie, pointed out something really fascinating about the clown. The clown shows a lot of persistence. He couldn't do it himself, but he kept asking other engines and other things, will you come and help us get over there? So I think there's persistence in two things. There's persistence where you just try and do what you're trying to do. There's also that persistence in just trying to get help to do what you need to do. So I think that little engine that could, this story, is a fabulous story around persistence.
So this is a reflection. I am fairly certain I'm not the right person to talk about persistence. In our family, that's Tracy's department. And here's a story. When she and I met in Washington, D.C. in the early 1990s, we were working for competing public affairs agencies. So for those of you not familiar with the dark arts of Washington, D.C. politics, a key part of our respective jobs was convincing journalists to report on our clients in the way our bosses wanted them to be depicted. And to do that, And for any digital natives out there, hang with me for a second. The path to success was getting a journalist on the telephone, and then even harder, get them to stay on the line to listen to your pitch. You'd get a call list that had journalist names, the outlets, their phone numbers, and you would work through it. I hated it. I hated bugging people who didn't want to talk with me. I hated being thought of as a flack. I'd make the calls, I'd leave a message, I'd try a bit if someone picked up. If they happened to like what I had to say, sometimes it would work out, but if not, I simply crossed their name off the list and I moved on. Tracy was different. She saw it as a personal challenge to get a reporter to bite, and she loved figuring out how to get it done. She researched the journalists, she knew the previous stories that they had covered, she tried to learn about their interests. She called repeatedly at different times of the day. She'd look for other reporters in the department. She'd seek out an editor and try them. She'd follow up with any openings. She'd send information promising to call again. If I was doing something, she was getting something done. So whatever persistence means, Tracy's PR firm benefited from it, and mine most certainly did not. But what was that difference between us? I suppose there are a lot of reasons why people do stuff: money, attention, power, crossing it off our to-do list. But what makes you want to know what a business reporter for the Washington Post had for dinner last night, so you can lightly reference it in a phone message for the slight chance it tips the scales in your favor in a story? Who does that? I don't think external rewards are enough, or at least not after a while. I think it's this: Tracy loved, and she still does, her craft. That love drove her to try different approaches, stick with it after being rejected for the 12th straight time, smile when a hunch with an editor paid off. She liked the game. She liked getting better at it. She liked it when she made something extraordinary happen. She loved her craft. So I do believe there's another reason that drives persistence, a higher reason. It's being motivated by something greater than yourself, trying to make a difference for others in the world. Think about what we just heard from Linda at Upward Scholars and all of you who raised your hands. Why so many of you have devoted hundreds of hours volunteering for them. It's motivating. But I don't know if service to a higher cause by itself is enough to drive someone to extraordinary persistence. I'm about to talk way out of my league here, but would you volunteer your time rather than your money to organizations and causes you care about where the volunteering itself is really hard if you didn't love the act as well as the outcome? I wonder. So back in Washington, D.C. in the early 90s, Tracy plied her craft for clients like the Beer and Distillers Association. She didn't really care about, and over time, she came in some instances to abhor, but she did her job well. I, on the other hand, had the opportunity to work for Nelson Mandela. You tell me which client deserved the better craftsperson. I did find my craft after a while. I love bringing people together in common cause, finding ways to overcome our differences, to create stronger alignment so we can be better together than separate. It's not easy. Allies fight worse than enemies sometimes, but it is easier to stick with it because I love the doing as well as what we do it for.
Thank you, Larry, for that. I think if there's ever an example of persistence, it's people with musical talent, because they've practiced so many times. So thank you, Larry and Dawn, for blessing us with your music. Thank you, Chris, for your reflection. Well, this is the second in a series of worship service I'm doing on the 7 lively virtues, which is in contrast to the 7 deadly sins. And I actually did this because I actually thought it'd be more fun doing, lively virtues than sins. But actually, I wish I was doing sins today because, well, one, it's fun to talk about sin. But the other thing is, it's the deadly sin is sloth. I think, what's a lively virtue associated with that? And I think it's that idea of extraordinary effort or, persistence or perseverance. But I wish I could have just gone with the sloth path today, and I wouldn't even have had to bother writing a reflection. So go with love, go in love. Blessed be your name. You're not getting off so lucky. You're not getting off so lucky. I persisted and I have a reflection for you. You know, we hear these stories of perseverance, and there's so many. Back in February, I talked about Abraham Lincoln's path and resilience of all his failures. I don't know if you remember, but it's just, he had a catastrophic life. In fact, the only thing that he was really successful at was when he became president, and he ended up having a civil war during it. But then you think of Dr. Seuss. He was rejected by 27 publishers before he got his first book published. Author Jack London had 600 rejection letters. Walt Disney had many rejections. He was fired once because he had no talent. He was fired again because he lacked imagination and original ideas. But then he was working at a church in a mouse-infected shed, and he saw a mouse, and that's what inspired him to do Mickey Mouse. So for those of you who want to volunteer at the church, you never know, it might be your idea for your next corporation comes out. We'll find the right mouse-infected shed for you to work in. J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, was rejected by 12 publishers for her first book. And the 13th publisher was going to reject it. He'd read the first chapter, but his 8-year-old daughter started reading it and became engrossed. And he thought there might be something to this. That is how J.K. Rowling ended up getting published by the 13th publisher. And I also think of like sports, you know, people who persist in practice of sports. Michael Jordan, the great basketball player, perhaps one of the greatest basketball players ever, he was cut from his high school basketball team. Wonder how that coach feels. But he never let failure deter him. And here's a quote from him. He said, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost more than 300 games. On 26 occasions, I have been entrusted to take the game-winning shot, and I missed. I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I have succeeded." And of course, back in 2017, you may remember the "nevertheless she persisted." Do you remember that thing that was going around when Elizabeth Warren was she was objecting to Jeff Sessions becoming the US Attorney General, and she was cut off by Senator Mitch McConnell, who said that, but nevertheless, she persisted even though we censured her and told her to be quiet. And that became a rallying cry for women and feminists throughout the world, that nevertheless, she persisted. And I think of our own example from Olympia Brown, from our own Universalist tradition, who campaigned for 60 years for the right for women to vote. And eventually, at the age of 88 in 1920, she was one of the few of those early suffragettes who were able to vote. Nevertheless, she persisted. So I think we admire, this persistence. People achieve that. But I also just want to talk for a moment about the shadow side of persistence. Robocalls. They are the most annoying thing. I keep getting asked about my car warranty, and I don't own a car. So that's the downside of persistence of robocalls. Machines will always be more persistent than we are, but I'm persistent in screening them. But persistence is about continuing to try and achieve a goal. When you're hitting obstacles, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're not sure it's going to succeed. And so persistence really, where does it come from? Can we nurture persistence, or are some people just naturally persistent? I don't consider I have many special skills, but I know one thing I do have is persistence. Natalie and Isla look at me and just can't believe, that I'll keep trying and trying again. I don't think of many other abilities, but I wonder where that came from. And I'm not exaggerating when The Little Engine That Could was a hugely influential book on me. Just like you've got to keep trying and not give up. But I think there's different types of persistence. We need to realize that it's not always good to persist. We don't want to just keep going if the goal doesn't make any sense. And I always think of the great story that Stephen Covey says, where he's talking about this thing of this big cruiser going through, this American Navy cruiser sailing, and he sees this light in the distance, and they flash the light saying, "Please, please change your course. And the other light flashes back and said, you change your course. And he said, I'm Admiral so-and-so, please change your course. He goes, I'm Ensign so-and-so, you change your course. He said, I'm the Admiral of a US Navy cruiser. And the light comes back, I'm a lighthouse. So that's a good example where you maybe shouldn't persist in that one because you're not going to win. So sometimes we really need to look, if we're really struggling with something, is it worth continuing on in that path? And I would encourage none of us to argue with a lighthouse. And as a cyclist, I don't argue with cars or trucks or buses. So sometimes, but no, how do we need to change goals? How do we keep our energy up to find another goal? Because I mean, it can be even disappointing, even when you know you're consulting an immovable object. How do you keep your energy up? And I think, keep it going over obstacles, hardships. If you've got a long, uncertain path ahead, like the little train, it just kept going. It wanted to try it. It wasn't going to change its goal, but it just kept trying. And as someone who worked in the high-tech industry, like some of us here did, I remember saying the projects, you'll be the first 90% of a project, then the second 90% of a project, and sometimes even a third 90% of the project, and usually that project would get cancelled by that point. But, you sometimes just keep going, and, everything seems to take much longer. We look at the video project here, we look at this pandemic that we're all going through. It's all taking longer than I think any of us could ever imagine. But still, when you achieve that goal, that sometimes does make it more meaningful. And I thought Chris's reflection was beautiful when he was talking about how do you love the craft and can you keep persistent if you don't love what you're doing? I think that's a great question. And I think, I'm not sure, is it really persistence if you love what you're doing? Or is it when you don't love what you're doing and you keep pursuing it? Is that really persistence? And I think that's a question that we really need to think about. Because I think sometimes if you've got this bigger goal, if you've got this goal that's dependent on other people, like the little engine and the clown knew that these toys were depending on it. They had this bigger goal of getting these toys to the children in this other town. The process of climbing up that hill may not be easy, but they had a bigger goal, and that's what motivated them. That's what gave them the persistence to keep trying. And I have actually I've actually experienced some of Tracy's persistence, and I don't know if Chris knows this, but the banner outside the front, Tracy was instrumental in making that happen. And she was incredibly persistent when me and 3 other Unitarian Universalists were trying to wordsmith the words going on that banner, and she showed incredible patience and persistence and perseverance with that. And I still owe her a big apology, so sorry, Tracy. But she's got the patience of an angel, and I think she knew that was a big goal, and I think I don't know if she enjoyed the process, but she knew what we were doing was important. But you look at the history of, if you're working on behalf of others, if you're working in a cause beyond yourself, and many, for those of us who understand are religious, something, if you feel you're doing the work of the divine or God, or working on, to fulfill our highest ideals, our highest goals, then that can be motivating. It can mean that you can be doing terrible, boring work, but it's for a higher cause. I think that can allow us to keep going, especially when we're doing it on behalf of others. And sometimes I think what ultimately is most helpful in persistence, if you feel you're learning and growing while you're doing it. And Thomas Edison said he never felt he failed. He found over 1,000 ways not to build a light bulb. I wonder if that's really true. But again, you keep up your energy, you keep up your motivation, and you learn. Because I think what's one of the paths where you can get persistence. It's where you have this growth mindset, like, this may not be working, it may be taking longer, but I am learning, I am growing through this experience. And for many religious people, it's that sense that we're working in collaboration and co-creation with a higher power. And George Washington Carver was one of the most prominent African-American scientists of the 20th century. And he's got a wonderful museum in Austin, Texas, if you're ever there, about the Black history in Austin, Texas. It's named the George Washington Carver Museum. And he developed hundreds of useful products, and he was a soil scientist. But he did a lot of work in peanuts. And when he was young, he said this conversation with God. He said, God, tell me the mystery of the universe. And God answered, that knowledge is reserved for me alone. So I said, God, tell me the mystery of the peanut. Then God said, well, George, that's more nearly your size. And he told me. So I think one of the things that helps us keep going with humility is this idea, or keep going with persistence, is humility. Knowing that we're working in things bigger than ourselves. And I agree with Chris, there is an element, if you've got pride in your craft and hope in your actions, that combination can help sustain us through those difficult challenges, those obstacles, that tiredness, that boredom that can often come with tasks. But how do you motivate yourself when you're struggling with perseverance? I think you can look around this church. And I want to hold up a group that is particularly dear to me, the ministerial search team. Because during the first round of search last year, they did not find a candidate. And that's after 1 or 2 years of work. That can be hugely disappointing. They've put in all this work, there was candidates they liked, and they were not able to find a match there. And it was Erica Brattel, Tracy Fetcher, Dee Dee Stovall, Carl Sloan, and Bill Welsh were on that team. But then they had to decide if they were going to go into the second round of search or not. And they decided they would go into the second round of search. And that's where we connected with me. So I'm really appreciative of their perseverance, but they were dealing with a lot of disappointment in that first round, but they still decided, let's go that extra next step. And then this pulpit and the chalice table, I've been informed by one of the church mice, John Cooney, that this was a 5-year project. And that was an act of love. I'm sure they enjoyed the craft, and I'm sure there was arguments and disagreements. But this is another example of perseverance. The end result is beautiful. The end result really creates this incredible sacred worship space. But this, yes, there was skill involved, but it would not have happened without persistence and perseverance. And one of the things that perseverance, I think, is so important for us right now is to build resilience in us. Because the learnings we get through perseverance and persistence, the things we learn, the confidence it can build in each of us as individuals and families and as a community can help build resilience, which we need as we move through this pandemic. And I think persistence can come from a love of what you're doing, a love for a greater cause, and a love of what could be achieved, or sometimes just a simple love of challenge. And people who model persistence, I think, have these traits of commitment, ability to adapt, patience, and positive, optimistic people, and above all, hopeful. And persistence, I think, is grounded in hope. And much of the hope is not necessarily that long-term goal is within reach, but it's believing that we're in the right path, doing the right thing for a worthwhile goal.